The conference room inside Norfolk Naval Station had always carried a certain weight, an unspoken seriousness that settled over anyone who crossed its threshold. The long mahogany table, the polished brass emblems, the framed painting of distant blue mountains, everything in the room reminded people that this was a place where decisions mattered. But that morning, something felt different. A strange tension hung in the air, quiet but unmistakable, as though everyone sensed that the meeting would not unfold the way they expected. At the head of the table stood Admiral Brianna Lane, the Navy's unshakable pillar of discipline. Tall, poised, and sharp as a blade, her white uniform seemed almost to glow beneath the overhead lights. Every ribbon on her chest was placed with immaculate precision, each one a symbol of a life lived in absolute service. Her officers sat around the table backs, straight hands folded. No one dared shift in their seat, because standing alone near the doorway, hands respectfully at his side, was Daniel Cole, a civilian technician on paper. But something about him did not belong to the category of ordinary. His olive-green shirt was worn but clean, the sleeves rolled to the elbows to reveal forearms lined with quiet stories, tattoos faded by time and salt water. His posture carried the unmistakable steadiness of someone who had learned to survive storms without ever raising his voice. And his eyes, calm, steady deeply, human, reflected a man who had seen too much and said too little. Brianna studied him for several seconds before speaking. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice crisp and controlled. "Step forward." Daniel did. Not a single sound echoed from his boots. It was as if he had learned to move through the world without asking anything from it. "This meeting," Brianna continued, "is part of a new evaluation protocol for emergency response readiness, civilian staff included." Across the table, a few officers exchanged glances. This was unusual, unnecessary, some thought. And judging by the stiffness in Brianna's shoulders, even she knew it, but she had her reasons. Recently, rumors circulated that some civilian personnel lacked the composure needed during crises. Brianna intended to test that. And Daniel Cole, for better or worse, had been selected as the centerpiece. She lifted her chin slightly. "Mr. Cole," she said, her tone shifting into something colder. "After reviewing your personnel file, I must deliver this assessment plainly." The room seemed to hold its breath. "You're not needed here." Even the hum of the air conditioner felt like it paused. A few officers blinked in disbelief. One woman at the far end looked almost offended on Daniel's behalf. Civilians rarely faced such directness, especially from someone like Admiral Lane. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't stiffen in embarrassment, didn't stammer out a defense, didn't even lower his gaze. Instead, he inhaled quietly, letting the air fill his chest as though steadying himself, not against the words, but against what they might mean for someone else. Then he lifted his hand and placed it gently over his heart. "Admiral." His voice carried warmth, not wounded pride. "If that's your judgment, I accept it." His eyes, dark, tired, sincere, met hers with a kind of quiet bravery that felt too familiar to ignore. But he swallowed softly. "Please, don't let my daughter hear about this. Bella still believes her father is trying his best. I'd like to keep that hope alive for her at least a little longer." A silence fell heavier than before. It was not the silence of discipline. It was the silence of hearts, shifting of walls, cracking of something unexpected and deeply human, breaking through steel. Brianna's eyes flickered just once, but it was enough. Something in Daniel's request disarmed her. She had expected defensiveness, irritation, maybe even anger, but she had not expected this humility without weakness, dignity without defensiveness. An officer seated near her whispered under his breath, "My God!" Daniel stood there with his hand still over his heart, not out of military habit, but out of sincerity, an instinctive gesture of someone who did not know how else to protect the small, fragile world he had left. Brianna cleared her throat, attempting to regain control of the moment. "You have a daughter?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. It was a personal inquiry, something she rarely allowed in uniform. Daniel nodded once. She's 7. Her name is Bella, and you're raising her alone, yes, ma'am, since her mother passed. No embellishment, no dramatization, just the truth, spoken with steady acceptance. Another ripple of quiet moved through the room. Brianna found herself grasping for her professional composure. For 20 years, she had mastered every form of discipline, emotional, strategic, psychological, but she had not prepared for this, for a man who seemed carved out of patience and pain, standing in front of her with nothing to hide and nothing to prove. She tightened her jaw. Mr. Cole, this evaluation isn't personal. The Navy simply— Daniel shook his head gently. I understand, Admiral. Truly, you have a duty. I respect that. And he did. Every syllable carried genuine respect, not fear, not resentment. Brianna exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. Something about Daniel's manner unsettled her, not because he challenged her authority, but because he didn't. He responded with a calmness she couldn't categorize, a dignity she hadn't anticipated, a dignity she wasn't sure she could walk away from. Across the table, one of the junior officers leaned forward and whispered to a colleague, "He's not like the others." No, Brianna thought, he certainly isn't. For the first time, she allowed herself to look at Daniel, not as an item on a personnel list, not as a civilian to be evaluated, but as a man carrying far more weight than anyone in the room could see. "Mr. Cole," she said softer now, "this assessment will be reviewed. Further decisions have yet to be made." Daniel bowed his head respectfully. "Whatever you decide, Admiral, I'll do my best. That's all I have left to give." And something in Brianna's chest tightened. The test she had designed was simple, but she suddenly realized she was the one being tested. Admiral Brianna Lane did not often linger after meetings. Her schedule typically moved with the precision of a metronome. Every minute accounted for every task completed with sharp efficiency. But that morning, after Daniel Cole stepped out of the conference room, she found herself standing still, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, as though something inside her refused to move forward. Around her, officers quietly gathered their folders and tablets. No one spoke of what had just occurred, but every glance carried the same unsettled understanding. Something about Daniel's response had shifted the room's center of gravity. Brianna was not fond of loose ends, and Daniel Cole had just become one. She tapped her tablet, pulling up his personnel profile as she walked briskly toward her office. Facts steadied her mind, data, records, dates. They didn't tremble or hesitate the way human emotions did. His file opened. Daniel A. Cole, age 38, former Navy Special Operations, 12 years, commendations, 3 disciplinary actions, none marital status, widowed dependent, Bella Cole, age 7, Brianna paused, 12 years in Special Operations, 3 commendations for valor, no disciplinary marks at all. Men from that world rarely came out unscarred physically or emotionally. Yet Daniel's performance record was nothing short of exceptional, clean, steady, trusted. So why, she wondered, was he now repairing electrical systems as a civilian technician? Why had a man with that level of service disappeared into a life so quietly unassuming? She scrolled deeper into the file. Spouse, Dana. Cole, deceased vehicle collision, service separation. Voluntary, 6 months after spouse's passing. Brianna exhaled slowly. Not out of sympathy. Sympathy was a dangerous luxury in her line of work, but out of recognition. Loss had a way of forcing people to redefine themselves. Some shattered, some hardened, and some rarely became gentler versions of who they used to be. Daniel, she suspected, belonged to the third group. She closed the file and sat down, elbows resting on her desk, fingers steepled. Her mind replayed the moment in the conference room. "Please, don't let my daughter hear about this. Not don't judge me, not I deserve better." Just a father protecting a fragment of light in a world that had already taken enough from him. That kind of dignity couldn't be taught. It could only be forged. For the next several days, Brianna observed Daniel discreetly. She rarely involved herself in civilian operations, but something about him defied simplicity. Each small interaction revealed another quiet layer. He arrived early, always, never rushed, never sloppy, always prepared. He greeted others with a nod, not because protocol required it, but because respect seemed woven into his being. When a young sailor dropped a box of equipment, Daniel knelt beside him without hesitation, offering help without condescension. When a generator malfunctioned during a training exercise, Daniel solved the problem in half the expected time and then stayed longer to ensure the junior technicians understood how to prevent it next time. He never bragged, never asked for credit, never acted as if the world owed him anything. If anything, he seemed to move through the base like a guest, quietly trying not to inconvenience anyone. But Brianna saw what others missed: the practiced calm in his hands, the alertness behind his eyes, the way he always positioned himself near exits or vantage points. Old habits, special operations habits, never truly left. More than once, she found herself watching him longer than she intended. During a routine inspection, she saw Daniel pause beside a bulletin board filled with family photos submitted by sailors. He looked at them with a faint smile, the kind a person gives to things they don't quite belong to anymore. But when he reached into his pocket and took out a small, creased drawing, clearly done by a child, bright colors and shaky lines, Brianna felt something inside her chest tighten unexpectedly. Bella, the daughter who still believed her father was a hero. Brianna didn't know when she had last been believed in that way. That evening, she sat alone in her office long after her staff had gone home. The base outside was quiet, lit only by the soft hum of security lights. She reopened Daniel's file, not because she needed more information, but because she needed clarity. She read through the details again, participated in recovery operation during monsoon flooding, rescued teammates under collapsing terrain, solo extraction of injured squad member during sandstorm complications, maintained exceptional composure under sustained hostile pressure. Every commendation was tied not to aggression or tactical brilliance, but to sacrifice, to loyalty, to doing the right thing even when the right thing asked too much. Men like him were rare. Men like him were often overlooked. Men like him were sometimes dangerous to the rigid systems she had sworn to uphold, not because they disobeyed, but because they reminded people of what true service looked like. And now she had tested him, harshly, unnecessarily. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Why had she done it? Was it pressure from above? The fear that civilians were losing discipline? Or something quieter? A suspicion she didn't want to admit, because when Daniel stood before her, calm and unrattled, she had felt something she hadn't felt in years. She had felt seen, as if he understood burdens without needing them explained. That unnerved her more than any breach of protocol. The next morning, Brianna found herself walking past the maintenance corridor where Daniel and his team were working. She told herself she was checking on facility repairs, but when she saw him bent over an open panel patiently guiding a younger technician through the wiring, she slowed her steps. The young man asked a nervous question. Daniel didn't sigh or correct him sharply. Instead, he smiled a little. "Don't worry, every mistake is just a lesson you haven't learned yet. We'll get it right." The technician relaxed visibly. Brianna felt something in her chest shift again. A man who could command without raising his voice. A man who could teach without belittling. A man who carried pain without letting it poison him. This was not someone who didn't belong. This was someone her base needed, whether the regulations said so or not. She walked away before Daniel noticed her, but her steps were slower now. She had tested him, but the real test, the one that mattered, had only just begun. The sun had already dipped behind the row of aging apartment buildings when Daniel Cole pulled his car into the narrow parking lot of the veteran housing complex. The old sedan rattled as he turned off the engine, the dashboard lights flickering the way they always did when the car had been pushed harder than it liked. He sat there for a moment, breathing in the quiet, letting the weight of the day settle into the soft dimness around him. He always did this, paused before going inside. Not because home was a burden, but because stepping through that door meant stepping into another life, one he treasured more than anything, the life of a father trying to give his daughter a world gentler than the one he had endured. He gathered his bag, climbed out, and locked the car with a soft click. From the second-floor balcony, a small voice rang out with the kind of excitement only a child can summon. "Daddy, Daddy's home." Before he could respond, Bella, all bright eyes, messy ponytail, and boundless energy, burst out of their apartment, her little sneakers thumping against the walkway as she ran toward him. She threw her arms around his waist with the fierce determination of a child hugging the one person who made her world feel safe. Daniel crouched down, scooping her up effortlessly. "Hey, Belle," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You draw anything today?" Bella nodded vigorously, her cheeks flushed with pride. "I made something special. I wanted to show it to you right away." She wriggled out of his arms and dashed back into the apartment, leaving the door wide open for him. Daniel smiled softly as he stepped inside. Their home was small, modest furniture, faded curtains, a kitchen that hummed louder than it should, but the place radiated warmth. Crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator. 2 mismatched mugs sat drying beside the sink. A pink blanket lay draped across the small couch, and a stuffed rabbit sat propped at an angle that suggested Bella had staged it intentionally. This was not a perfect home, but it was a loved one. Bella reappeared, holding a sheet of thick white paper. She handed it to Daniel with a look so earnest it pulled at something deep inside him. On the page was a colourful drawing, a tall figure clearly meant to be Daniel, standing on a pier, sunlight behind him, one arm reaching out protectively toward a small girl. Above their heads, Bella had written in big uneven letters, "My daddy is a hero." Daniel's breath caught. Bella beamed. "Do you like it?" He swallowed the memory of Admiral Lane's cold words, still lingering somewhere in his chest. "I love it," he whispered. "More than you know." Bella's gaze softened, sensing something beneath his voice, even if she didn't fully understand it. Children had a quiet way of reading truth. "Daddy," she said, her small hand touching his cheek. "You're tired today." Daniel forced a faint smile. "A little. But seeing you always makes it better." She nodded with a wise seriousness far beyond her 7 years. "Miss Turner at school says when grown-ups get tired, it's because their hearts are carrying too much." She reached out and placed her palm gently against his chest. "Is your heart heavy today?" His throat tightened. He scooped her into his arms again, holding her close. "Not anymore," he murmured. They spent the next hour cooking dinner together, a simple meal of pasta and vegetables, Bella stirring the pot with dramatic precision, while Daniel pretended to follow her expert instructions. She talked about her day spelling quizzes, a classmate who brought a puppy to show and tell the story her teacher read aloud about a brave sailor who crossed the ocean to deliver medicine to a village. When she mentioned the sailor, her eyes sparkled. "Daddy, he was brave just like you." Daniel froze only for a second, then continued chopping tomatoes. "I don't know if anyone's quite that brave, Belle." "I do," she said confidently. "I live with one." There it was again, the belief that pierced him every time. He didn't tell her about the meeting that morning, about the Admiral's dismissive evaluation, about how much those words had echoed in him long after he left the room. "You're not needed here." No, he thought now, looking at Bella as she danced to music only she could hear. "I may not be needed there, but I'm needed here." That truth alone kept him standing. After dinner they settled onto the couch, Bella curled under his arm, her head resting against his chest, while he read from her favorite book stories of old ship's explorers and courageous acts that shaped the seas. Halfway through the chapter, Bella lifted her head. "Daddy," she whispered, "why don't you work on the ships anymore? You always smile in your old pictures." Daniel hesitated. He had been expecting this question for months. He thought he was ready. He wasn't. "I wanted to be home with you," he said softly. Bella blinked. "But couldn't you bring me on the ship too?" He smiled faintly. "Ships are loud and dangerous, and they move too fast for little feet." She giggled. "My feet are fast." He tapped her nose gently. "Not fast enough for the ocean." Bella seemed satisfied with that answer, but her next question struck deeper. "Do you miss being a sailor?" Memories flickered sandstorms, roaring propellers, the weight of a teammate's arm over his shoulders as he carried him through darkness. Nights when he wasn't sure he'd survive. Days when survival felt like the smallest part of the battle. "I miss parts of it," he admitted. "But not as much as I'd miss you." Bella smiled, curling into him again, and Daniel wrapped his arms around her, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. A quiet life wasn't always easy, but it was the life he chose, a life that mattered to one small girl who still saw him as a hero. Later that night, after tucking Bella into bed with her stuffed rabbit and turning on her nightlight, Daniel stepped into the hallway and let out a long breath. He didn't know Admiral Lane was rethinking her assessment. He didn't know she had spent the day studying his record. He didn't know she had begun to question her own approach. All he knew was that tomorrow he would show up again, quiet, steady, ready to work. Because that was who he had become. Because for Bella, he had to be someone she could believe in. And somewhere deep inside her own guarded world, Admiral Brianna Lane was beginning to wonder how a man with so little could still hold so much dignity. The next evening unfolded like any other, or so Daniel believed. The maintenance hangar buzzed softly with the rhythm of ordinary work, the whir of tools, the low murmur of technicians troubleshooting wiring panels, the occasional clank echoing through the metal beams above. It was the sort of evening that let a man disappear into routine. Daniel welcomed that. Routine didn't judge him. Routine didn't ask questions. Routine didn't test him the way Admiral Lane had. He focused on the task at hand, recalibrating a voltage regulator that had been misbehaving for weeks. His hands moved with practiced steadiness, his mind calm, a rare, precious calm, until his phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. He frowned. Bella's school had his number, but they rarely called after hours. He swiped answer. Mr. Cole. The voice on the other end trembled slightly. "This is Nurse Hamilton from Willow Creek Elementary. I'm afraid Bella's not well." The wrench slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. What happened? "She developed a high fever very suddenly. She fainted in class. We've tried cooling her down, but it's not responding." Daniel was already moving, grabbing his jacket, heading for the exit. "I am on my way." He hung up, heart-kicking into high gear vision, narrowing into a tunnel of instinct. The hangar around him, blurred voices calling after him, tools being set down, but none of it reached him. Bella, his little girl, his entire world. He bolted toward the parking lot. The temperature had dropped, and a cold wind cut across the asphalt as he reached his car. Keys in hand, he lunged into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, went dead. Daniel gritted his teeth, tried again, and again. Nothing. No, not now. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel. The old car had been limping along for months, but tonight, of all nights, it chose to fail. His breath fogged the windshield as panic pressed in around him. He looked toward the dark road stretching beyond the lot. No taxis. No rideshare cars. The base shuttle had ended an hour earlier. He reached for the door handle, preparing to run if he had to. But before he could take a single step, headlights swung into the lot, sharp, commanding, unmistakably military. A sleek Navy sedan glided to a stop beside him. The driver's door opened. Admiral Brianna Lane stepped out. Her white uniform coat was still crisp from the evening's briefing. Her hair was pulled back tighter than usual, as if the day had been longer and harsher than she allowed herself to admit. She took one look at Daniel, breathing hard, panic barely restrained, and her expression shifted. "What's wrong?" she demanded, voice firm but not cold. "My daughter," he said breathlessly. "Bella. She fainted in class." They can't get her fever down. My car—" He gestured helplessly at the unmoving vehicle. Something flickered in Brianna's eyes. Concern, urgency, maybe something even deeper, though she masked it quickly. "Get in," she ordered. "Now." Daniel didn't hesitate. He slid into the passenger seat as Brianna moved with brisk efficiency, circling the car and dropping behind the wheel. The moment the doors shut, she hit the lights. The engine surged. The sedan shot forward. Street lamps blurred as they sped through the base gates. The road unwound before them in streaks of grey and white, and inside the car, the only sound was the hum of the engine until Daniel's voice broke through quietly. "She's never fainted before." Brianna didn't look at him, but her hands tightened subtly on the wheel. "Children get sick quickly," she said, "and they recover quickly." Daniel nodded, though the reassurance barely reached him. His breath came unevenly. His fingers dug into his knees. After a moment, Brianna spoke again, softer now. "She'll be okay, Cole." Something in her tone made him turn. She wasn't just saying it. She believed it. He drew a slow breath, grounding himself. The hospital came into view sooner than he expected. Brianna pulled up to the emergency entrance, stopped hard, and unbuckled immediately. Daniel was already out before the car finished settling, sprinting toward the doors. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt harsh, the antiseptic smell sharp. A nurse recognized him and rushed over. "You must be Bella's father. Follow me." Daniel barely registered the words. Brianna fell a few steps behind him, not intruding, but present in a way that seemed instinctive, not obligated. They reached the small treatment room where Bella lay curled beneath a thin blanket, her face flushed scarlet hair, damp with sweat. "Daddy!" she whispered weakly. Daniel's entire body softened and broke at the same time. He knelt beside her, taking her tiny hand into both of his. "I'm here, Belle. I'm right here." His voice wavered, but he held her hand steady. "You're going to be okay, I promise." Bella blinked slowly, her eyes barely able to stay open. "I didn't feel good." Daniel pressed his forehead against her hand. "I know, sweetheart. Just rest." Brianna stood at the doorway, her gaze fixed on the scene, with a stillness so deep it bordered on reverence. The man who had stood before her in perfect composure that morning, accepting judgment without flinching, was now unraveling quietly beside his child. Not weak. Never weak. Just human in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Hours passed. Nurses moved in and out. Tests were run. Fluids administered. Through it all, Daniel never left Bella's side. He held her hand, stroked her hair, whispered stories of brave sailors and magical seas. And Brianna stayed. She didn't know why, she just couldn't bring herself to leave. Near midnight, Bella stirred faintly, her voice barely audible. "Daddy?" Daniel leaned close. "I'm here, Belle." Her small lips trembled. "Don't go." A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek before he could stop it. "Never," he whispered. "Never, baby girl." Brianna looked away because witnessing that kind of love felt almost too raw, too honest. In that quiet, fragile moment, something inside her cracked open. She had tested Daniel, but life was testing him far more deeply, and he was meeting it with a strength she had not fully understood until now. The hospital at night felt like a world suspended between breaths. The fluorescent lights glowed softly against the white tile floors, casting long, pale reflections that stretched into the quiet hallways. Every so often, a nurse's shoes whispered across the linoleum, or the soft beep of a monitor signaled life continuing in small, steady pulses. Inside Bella's room, however, time seemed to have slowed to a near standstill. Daniel sat in a firm plastic chair pulled so close to the bed that his knees pressed against the metal frame. His elbows rested on the mattress, his hands wrapped gently around Bella's tiny fingers. Exhaustion had pooled beneath his eyes, but he didn't blink it away. He didn't move. His entire world was contained in that small, fragile hand. Her fever had eased, though not enough to calm the ache in his chest. A thin sheen of sweat still glistened across her forehead, and every now and then she let out a soft, restless sigh. But her breathing had steadied. Her heartbeat had found a safer rhythm. Daniel whispered to her stories, memories, promises soft enough that even the night itself seemed to lean in to listen. Across the room, Admiral Brianna Lane stood near the window, arms crossed posture, stiff as though she were defending herself against something unseen. But the truth was simpler and far more complicated. She didn't know how to step away. From the moment she saw Daniel run into the hospital, something had anchored her, an instinct she didn't fully understand. She told herself she stayed because she brought him there, because it was the responsible thing, because a superior officer should ensure the well-being of base personnel. But she had been lying to herself for hours. She stayed because something about Daniel, about the way he carried pain with dignity, about the way he held love with reverence, had opened a fissure in her carefully constructed armor. For 20 years, Brianna had been a fortress, unshakable, flawless, untouchable. Tonight, she felt none of those things. A nurse entered quietly with a clipboard. Brianna straightened immediately, slipping back into her command persona. "How is she?" Daniel asked, lifting his head. The nurse smiled warmly. "Her vitals are improving. The fluids are helping and the fever's lowering. I think she just needs rest." Daniel exhaled shakily. His head dropped, shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank God." Brianna felt her heart twist, unexpected, unwelcome. The look on his face, the raw vulnerability in his breath. It was the kind of emotion she had trained herself never to show. When the nurse left, the silence returned. Bella stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, just a sliver. "Daddy!" Daniel leaned forward instantly. "I'm here, sweetheart." She blinked slowly, a weak smile appearing. "You!" Didn't leave. Not for a second. Bella's small hand tightened around his finger, and she whispered in a voice barely audible. "I love you, Daddy!" Daniel's throat constricted. Tears rose before he had a chance to stop them. He swallowed hard, but the emotion overwhelmed him. For the first time in years, tears slipped down his cheeks, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet grief, quiet love, and quiet relief, all mixing together in a way that cracked even the strongest walls. Brianna froze at the sight. Not because she judged him, far from it, but because she didn't know how to deal with a man whose strength came from softness, not steel. She had seen countless men break under pressure, soldiers, commanders, decorated officers with nerves of iron, but their breakdowns usually came with anger, frustration, or guilt. Daniel's tears were different. They carried tenderness, not weakness, and that terrified her more than anything. She looked away, her jaw tightening as though she were trying to hold her own emotions in place. But the crack had already formed. Hours passed. Bella drifted into deeper sleep, her breathing steadier now. Daniel finally leaned back in the chair, rubbing his eyes with trembling fingers. "You should rest," Brianna said quietly. He looked at her, surprised. "I'm okay. That's not what I asked." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You sound like a doctor." Her eyebrows lifted. "Hardly. I'm just observant." "You've been here for hours," he said softly. "You didn't have to stay." Brianna opened her mouth to reply, but the words didn't come easily. Nothing she rehearsed in her mind sounded honest, so she spoke plainly, something she rarely allowed. "You're her only parent," she said. "No one should face this alone." Daniel blinked, taken aback by her unexpected gentleness. "Thank you, Admiral." Her gaze flicked toward Bella, then back to him. "She's a strong girl." "She is," he whispered. "Stronger than she knows." "And her father?" Brianna asked. Daniel let out a slow breath. "I try." A soft silence settled between them. She stepped closer to the bed, her eyes drawn to Bella's peaceful expression. "Children have a way of revealing who we are," she said, her voice low. "They reflect the best parts back at us, even when we've forgotten they were there." Daniel studied her. For the first time, he saw past the rigid authority, past the medals and commands. He saw a woman who had given so much of her life to discipline that she had forgotten what softness felt like. "Do you have kids, Admiral?" he asked gently. Brianna stiffened, a subtle movement but unmistakable. "No," he nodded. He didn't push. She had chosen silence. He respected that. But something flickered in her eyes, loss perhaps, or regret. Another hour passed. The world outside the window was dark and still broken only by the glow of distant streetlights. Daniel finally stood, stretching slowly, fatigue settling into his bones. Brianna watched him quietly. "You should get some rest," she repeated. "I will. Just not yet." She hesitated, then took a breath. "Cole." He looked at her. "You're a good father." The words came out as if pulled from somewhere deep inside her, a truth she hadn't meant to voice aloud. Daniel's eyes softened. "I'm just doing my best." "Your best," she said firmly, "is more than most men ever give." He didn't know how to respond to that. So he simply nodded. It was enough. For the first time since she met him, Brianna felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest, something warm, unsettling, and profoundly human. Respect, admiration, and maybe something else she wasn't ready to name. She turned toward the door before her composure slipped any further. "I'll return in the morning," she said. "If you need anything, you call me." "Understood." Daniel blinked, surprised. "Yes, Admiral, thank you." Brianna nodded once, then stepped into the hallway. As the door closed behind her, she exhaled slow, unsteady, because tonight she had witnessed something far stronger than military discipline. She had witnessed a father's love, and it cracked open a part of her she thought had long since turned to stone. Morning light spilled softly across the hospital corridor, warming the sterile white walls with a gentle gold. The world outside had awakened with its usual rhythm, cars humming along distant streets, seagulls calling overhead, the bass stirring back to life. But inside Bella's room, the quiet calm of dawn felt almost sacred. Daniel sat beside her bed, his fingers loosely intertwined with hers. The exhaustion in his posture was obvious, shoulders rounded, head bowed slightly, dark circles beneath his eyes. But there was a renewed steadiness in him too. Bella's fever had broken hours earlier, and her breathing had settled into an even peaceful rhythm. She would be okay. That was all that mattered. A soft knock tapped against the door before it opened halfway. Admiral Brianna Lane stepped in. Daniel blinked in surprise. "Admiral, you're here early." She offered a faint nod. She wore her uniform pristine as always, but there was a gentleness in her expression he hadn't seen before, a quiet relief. "How is she?" she asked. "She's better," Daniel said, his voice warm with gratitude. "The fever's down." Brianna exhaled as if she'd been holding that breath all night. "I'm glad," she murmured. Bella stirred, opening her eyes halfway. When she saw Brianna, her face brightened with a sleepy smile. "Hi, Admiral Lady." Daniel chuckled softly. Brianna's stern facade cracked just a fraction, and she stepped closer. "You're a brave sailor," she said gently. Bella's tiny voice fluttered like a feather. "Daddy stayed all night." "And so did the Admiral," Daniel added quietly. Bella blinked, then whispered, "Thank you." Something flickered in Brianna's chest, an unexpected warmth that caught her off guard. But the moment didn't last. A sharp buzz sounded from her phone. She checked the screen. Her posture changed instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by rigid attention. "Admiral Lane," she answered. "Yes, I'm listening." There was a pause. A long one. Her brows knit, her lips tightened, her shoulders stiffened with something between disbelief and anger. "I'm aware of the situation," she said finally. "I'll return to base immediately." She ended the call. Daniel straightened. "Is everything all right?" Brianna hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty before she met his eyes. "There's been an incident." "What sort of incident?" she inhaled sharply. A photograph of us entering the hospital last night was taken, and it's spreading." Daniel blinked, confused. "A photo?" Brianna nodded. "Yes, someone captured me carrying Bella inside with you right behind me. It's circulating through unofficial channels on the base." Daniel frowned. "Why would that be a problem?" Her jaw tightened. "Because rumors have started. About me. About you. About Bella." Daniel's chest clenched. "Rumors about—" "What that Bella is my child," Brianna said flatly. "That you and I have some sort of hidden relationship. That my conduct compromises the integrity of command." Daniel stared at her, speechless. "That's absurd." "Yes," she said, "but absurdity spreads faster than truth." He rose from the chair, rubbing his forehead. "Bella was sick. The car broke down. You helped, that's all." "It doesn't matter," she replied. "All they see is what they want to see." The tension in the room thickened. Bella watched quietly, sensing the shift, even if she didn't understand it. Daniel stepped closer to Brianna. "What happens now?" Her eyes lowered for the first time he'd seen. "The Command Council is demanding a formal review. They want you reassigned to another unit until the situation settles." Daniel froze. Reassigned. Pushed aside again, not because of something he'd done wrong, but because he was an easy target. A civilian, a widowed father, a man without rank or political shields. His jaw clenched, and Yui asked, "What happens to you?" Brianna lifted her chin, but her voice was quieter than usual. "They are questioning my judgment, my reputation, my neutrality." Daniel felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "For helping a child, for helping you," she corrected softly. The words hit him harder than expected. There was a stillness between them, a silent acknowledgement that something deeper than protocol had passed in the last 24 hours, something the world was ready to twist. Bella's small voice cut through the tension. "Did we do something bad?" Daniel turned instantly. "No, sweetheart. No, never. You did nothing wrong." Brianna stepped forward, kneeling next to Bella's bed, something Daniel never imagined a high-ranking admiral would ever do. "Bella," she said gently, "sometimes grown-ups make mistakes about what they see. But you are not in trouble. And your daddy did everything right." Bella blinked sleepily. "Will Daddy stay with me?" Daniel squeezed her hand. "Always, Belle." Brianna rose slowly. "I have to return to base. The council is expecting me." Daniel met her gaze. "And they want me gone." Brianna looked away. "They believe it will preserve the Navy's dignity." He let out a breath, half disbelief, half disappointment. "And what do you believe, Admiral?" The question struck deeper than he realized. Brianna's eyes lifted to his. "I believe the truth matters. I believe context matters. And I believe—" She hesitated, searching for words she wasn't used to sharing. "I believe that what happened last night revealed more integrity than I've seen in years." Daniel didn't look away. "Then tell them that." Her expression wavered, an expression caught between duty and conscience. "It isn't that simple." "It should be," he said quietly. Brianna swallowed hard. "I'll fight for the truth, Cole, but I can't promise how they'll respond." Daniel nodded, a slow, heavy nod of a man used to carrying burdens he didn't deserve. She took one last look at Bella, then at Daniel. "I'm not abandoning this," she said. "Not you, not her, not the truth." Then she left the room, her footsteps sharp and precise, but her heart more unsteady than ever before. When the door closed, Daniel sank back into the chair, staring at the wall as the weight of the situation settled onto him. He had faced storms, he had faced war, he had faced grief so deep it nearly swallowed him whole. But this felt different, because now the consequences wouldn't fall on him alone. They threatened the fragile peace he had built for Bella, and the unexpected allyship forming between him and the one woman he had believed least likely to stand beside him. Daniel exhaled sharply, shoulders bracing. A storm was coming. And this time, the battlefield wasn't sand or sea, it was politics perception, and the unforgiving scrutiny of those who had never learned the value of quiet dignity. By mid-afternoon, the base felt different, charged, brittle, alive, with an undercurrent of whispers that traveled faster than truth ever could. Every corridor Daniel walked through carried the faint echo of hushed voices. Technicians who once greeted him warmly now offered awkward nods. Sailors stepped aside, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. Rumors had a way of turning people into shadows of themselves. Daniel kept his gaze forward, his shoulders squared, his steps steady. He had lived through worse storms. But this one felt personal, not because it attacked his reputation, but because it grazed the one person he'd begun to trust in unexpected ways, and because it threatened Bella's safety and stability. He had just finished restoring power to a diagnostic console when his phone buzzed. "Report to Admiral Lane's office immediately." The message was short-clipped and carried the tone of official summons. Daniel slipped his tools into the locker, washed his hands, and headed toward the administrative wing. As he approached the hallway leading to Brianna's office, 2 junior officers passed him, their voices low. "That's him," one whispered. "The Admiral's situation," the other muttered. Daniel didn't break stride, but their words followed him like smoke. He reached the door. The gold placard gleamed, "Admiral Brianna Lane." He knocked once. "Enter," came her steady voice. He stepped inside. Brianna stood near her desk, arms folded behind her back posture, impeccably straight, but her eyes told another story. They were tired, sharper than usual, and edged with something between frustration and resolve. "Cole," she said. "Close the door." He did. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension in the room settled like dust. Then Brianna exhaled. "The council met this morning. They concluded that the rumors pose a risk to the Navy's public image." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And what does that mean for us?" "It means," she said carefully, "they want you transferred immediately to a remote support unit off base." Daniel's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something deeper: disappointment, resolve, a quiet refusal to be diminished. "I see," he said. Brianna stepped closer, her voice lower. "Cole, I argued against it." He looked up surprised. "I told them the rumors were baseless," she continued. "I told them you acted appropriately, that I did, that the situation was a simple medical emergency, nothing more." And he asked. Her jaw clenched. "They didn't listen." Daniel nodded slowly. "They never do when the truth is inconvenient." His words were not bitter, just painfully honest. Brianna flinched, not because of him, but because they mirrored her own thoughts too closely. "Cole." She hesitated, a rare crack in her confidence. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "You don't owe me an apology, Admiral." Her eyes sharpened. "Yes, I do." For a moment, the room felt very small. 2 people standing on opposite sides of an invisible line, drawn by rank expectation and emotion neither had anticipated. Then Brianna took a breath. "I fought for you," she said quietly, "but they want a decision by tomorrow morning." Daniel stepped forward. "And what do you want, Admiral?" The question stunned her. It wasn't challenging, it wasn't defensive, it was sincere. A lifeline thrown across a chasm. "What I want," she repeated softly, almost to herself. She looked at him, not at his uniform, not at his file, but at him. A man who had endured loss without collapsing. A father whose love had cracked her professional armor. A quiet hero who asked for nothing, demanded nothing, resented nothing. Her throat tightened. "I want the right thing to happen," she whispered. "For once." Daniel nodded, studying her face. "The right thing isn't always the easy thing." Brianna gave a faint, humorless smile. "In the Navy, it rarely is." He took a deep breath. "If they reassign me, it's fine. I'll make it work. Bella and I have been through worse." Her eyes flickered with something that resembled pain. "You shouldn't have to keep enduring worse, Cole." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm not the one under fire, Admiral. You are." Silence, deep, heavy, true. Because she knew he was right. She had built a flawless record, 2 decades of service unmarred by scandal, misstep, or personal entanglement. Every commander respected her. Every officer feared disappointing her. She had been the embodiment of discipline. But one night, helping a father and his sick daughter, cracked the foundation beneath her feet, and she couldn't ignore that crack no matter how many medals she wore. Daniel's voice broke the silence, gentle but piercing. "Admiral, I thought you understood something yesterday." Her brows lifted. "Understood what?" "That the truth," he said softly, "is worth protecting, even when it's messy, even when it costs us something." Her breath caught. The truth, the very thing she'd sworn to uphold, the very thing she'd seen slipping through the cracks of bureaucracy for years. And yet she had hesitated, not because she lacked courage, but because she had forgotten what courage looked like outside of rank protocol and chains of command. Daniel continued, his voice steady. "You told me once that children reveal who we really are. Bella, she sees the good in people, the real good, even when adults hide it." He paused, letting the words sink. "She saw something good in you." Brianna's composure faltered just slightly, but enough that Daniel noticed. He stepped closer. "Admiral," he said quietly, "don't let them erase what's right, just to protect what looks good." Her breath trembled. Of all people, she never expected Daniel Cole's civilian, widower, quiet father to be the one holding up a mirror to her conscience. But he was right. He was painfully, undeniably right. She straightened, resolve returning to her spine like steel reforging itself. "Cole," she said, her voice firm but newly alive with conviction, "I won't transfer you." Daniel blinked. "But the council will hear my decision," she interrupted, "not the other way around." He studied her face, steady, determined, unshaken. The fortress had cracks, but through those cracks something stronger was emerging. "I'll stand with the truth," she said quietly, "no matter the cost." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then I'll stand with you." The air between them shifted, no longer burdened with tension, but fortified with shared purpose. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was an alignment. 2 people, different worlds, different wounds, standing together against something larger than both. And it was only the beginning. Night had settled over Norfolk, cloaking the base in a calm that felt deceptively peaceful. The floodlights glowed along the fences, casting long shadows across the silent hangars and empty walkways. But inside Admiral Brianna Lane's home, a modest officer's quarters tucked away behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges, there was no peace. Not tonight. Brianna sat alone at her dining table, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sigh of the house settling. She stared at the documents spread before her, report statements, recommendations from the Command Council. Each one felt like a stone pressing down on her chest. Reassign Technician Cole immediately. Pending investigation, limit further contact. Protect the institution above all personal considerations. She had read the lines a dozen times, each time the words felt heavier. For 20 years, Brianna had lived by the Navy's Code Discipline Order reputation. She had risen through the ranks with near-perfect precision, never once giving anyone reason to question her integrity or her judgment. But now, because she carried a sick child into a hospital with compassion, with humanity, her judgment was on trial. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Sleep had avoided her for days, fluttering just out of reach, like a bird too wary to land. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face when she delivered the Council's demands. His disappointment wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it wasn't even surprised. And somehow that quiet acceptance broke something inside her. For the first time, Brianna felt her authority, her entire identity tremble. She stood abruptly and pushed away from the table. The room felt too small, too tight. She paced, footsteps slow but tense, her mind replaying the past 48 hours like scenes from a film she couldn't turn off. The rumor, the photograph, the Council's cold dismissal of truth, Daniel's unwavering dignity, Bella's small trusting smile. Truth had always been her compass, so why did the institution she dedicated her life to suddenly feel like an anchor pulling her under? Across the base, Daniel lay awake in the dim glow of his bedroom lamp. Bella slept soundly in the next room, her soft breathing a reminder that not all storms raged loudly. Daniel stared at the ceiling, exhaustion weighing heavily on his limbs. But his mind wouldn't rest. The conversation with Brianna echoed through him. "You're a good father. I won't transfer you. I'll stand with the truth, no matter the cost." She meant it. He saw that in her eyes. She wasn't the type to speak lightly. But he also knew the machine she was fighting, the politics hidden behind polished medals and pristine white uniforms. It was a machine that chewed up good intentions and spit them out as cautionary tales. Daniel had served long enough to understand the higher you climbed, the more pressure there was to bend. He closed his eyes. He didn't want Brianna to bend, not because of him, not because of Bella, and certainly not because of a lie that never should have started. But he sensed the weight she carried. He sensed she was reaching her breaking point, and he feared the cost. Back at her home, Brianna stopped pacing and pressed her hands against the countertop, grounding herself. The moonlight through the window illuminated her profile, strong, defined, but shadowed by exhaustion. She thought of Daniel's words. Don't let them erase what's right just to protect what looks good. She'd been so certain of her principles once. Her decisions were guided by a code she respected deeply. But Daniel's quiet truth had exposed a fault line in her thinking. She wasn't afraid of the council. She wasn't afraid of scandal. What she feared, what shook her to her core, was the possibility that she had allowed herself to forget what moral courage looked like. She had seen it in Daniel. She had seen it in Bella's eyes. Now she just had to find it in herself. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated, then answered. "Admiral Lane," a stern voice said. It belonged to Vice Admiral Ross, head of the Command Council. "We expect your compliance with our recommendation by 0900 tomorrow." Brianna steadied her voice. "Sir, with respect, I believe the Council's conclusion." "This is not about belief," Ross snapped. "It's about perception. And perception, Admiral, is reality to the public." Brianna closed her eyes. Sir Technician Cole did nothing wrong. "You carried a child into a hospital at midnight," Ross said sharply. "Do you know how that appears to those already critical of female command authority? You've handed them ammunition." Brianna's pulse quickened. "So I'm to be punished for showing compassion?" "You're to comply," Ross said. "If you wish to retain your command." The line went dead. Brianna lowered the phone slowly. Retain your command. 3 simple words. Her entire career reduced to a conditional sentence. She sat back down at the table, the weight of the moment sinking into her bones. She could comply. She could sign the reassignment order. It would protect her career, her standing, her flawless reputation. But it would betray something far more important, something she hadn't realized: she was still capable of valuing her integrity. She pressed her palms to her eyes, emotion thickening her breath. Suddenly, the tidy, carefully controlled life she had built felt like a cage. A knock startled her. She opened the door to find Lieutenant Harper, her aide, standing stiffly at attention. "Admiral Harper said I brought the formal reassignment document for Technician Cole. The Council asked for your signature tonight." Brianna stared at the folder. Harper held it like it contained something toxic. "Leave it on the table," Brianna said, her voice unreadable. "Yes, ma'am." When Harper left, Brianna approached the table slowly. The folder sat there, quiet, unassuming, ready to close a chapter that had only just begun. She opened it. Inside, Daniel's name stared back at her. She imagined signing it. Imagine handing it over. Imagine looking him in the eyes afterward. Her stomach twisted. For the first time in years, she felt something burning behind her stern composure anger, not at Daniel, not at Bella, but at the system she had devoted her life to, a system that in this moment had forgotten what service truly meant. She closed the folder. No, she whispered to the empty room. The decision was made, not by rank, not by pressure, but by conscience. Tonight, Admiral Brianna Lane reached her breaking point not by shattering, but by choosing to stand. And tomorrow, the Navy would have to face that choice. Rain swept across Norfolk in thin, silvery sheets, tapping against windows and rooftops like restless fingers. The storm had arrived without warning, rolling in from the Chesapeake Bay, with the kind of force that made even seasoned sailors glance skyward. Inside his apartment, Daniel stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a bowl from Bella's breakfast. She was finally home from the hospital, still tired, still pale, but smiling again. Her laughter drifted from the living room where she colored quietly, the soft hum of cartoons filling the space between her breaths. It was an ordinary morning. Or it should have been. But beneath the calm routine, a tension pulsed through Daniel like a second heartbeat. He knew what day it was. He knew what the council planned, and he knew what Brianna was up against. The thought weighed on him heavy as storm clouds. A soft knock sounded at the door. Daniel froze. Bella looked up from the couch. "Daddy, who is it? I'll go check, sweetheart." He wiped his hands on a towel and approached the door. Through the peephole, he saw white. The pristine white of a Navy admiral's uniform, already soaked from the rain. His breath caught. He opened the door. Admiral Brianna Lane stood on his doorstep, rain dripping from her coat, strands of hair clinging to her face, her eyes fierce with purpose, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Admiral, what I need to speak with you," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "May I come in, of course?" She stepped inside, water pooling on the entry mat. Daniel grabbed a towel instinctively and handed it to her. "Thank you," she murmured. Bella peeked shyly from the couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Admiral lady, you're wet." Despite everything, Brianna smiled soft and real. "Yes, sailors aren't very good with umbrellas, it seems." Bella giggled and retreated behind her coloring book. Daniel motioned toward the kitchen. "We can talk here." They sat at the small wooden table, Brianna with perfect posture, despite her soaked uniform, Daniel leaning forward, hands clasped. She placed a folder on the table. His heart sank. "Is that—" "Yes," she said, "the reassignment order." He swallowed. "So the council won?" "No," Brianna said firmly. "They didn't." Daniel looked up sharply. "I didn't sign it," she said. "I won't sign it." His breath eased, but only slightly. "Brianna, Admiral, you'll be putting your career at risk." "My career," she said quietly, "is not more important than the truth." He stared at her, searching her expression. She continued. "For years I believed that leadership meant avoiding mistakes, maintaining a flawless reputation, upholding protocol above all else." Her jaw tightened. "But that belief nearly cost me the very thing leadership requires: moral courage." Daniel's voice softened. "You have more courage than anyone I've met." A faint, almost disbelieving smile touched her lips. "I'm only now learning what courage actually looks like." She took a slow breath. "I went to the council this morning. Before they could demand my compliance, I informed them that I would not approve your reassignment. I told them the rumors were unfounded, that you acted with integrity, and that I stood by my decision." Daniel blinked. What did they say? They were stunned, angry, some of them. "I was warned that refusing their recommendation could end my advancement, possibly even provoke a formal inquiry." Daniel leaned back, exhaling hard. "You shouldn't have risked so much for me." Her eyes met his steady, unwavering. "This isn't just about you, Daniel. It's about what's right." He held her gaze, feeling something shift inside him, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and an emotion more complicated than either. He lowered his voice. "So, what happens now?" She looked down at her hands as if searching for the right words. "Now, I make things right." She slid another document across the table. Daniel glanced at it, confused. "This isn't a transfer form." "No," she said. "It's a promotion." Daniel's head snapped up. Supervisor of Technical Operations, she explained. A position you're not only qualified for, you're overqualified for. Admiral, I don't understand. Why? Because you deserve it, she interrupted. Because you've earned it. Because I've watched you work harder with more humility and more quiet dedication than most people with 3 times your rank. He was silent for a long moment. Brianna continued softer now. You've protected lives. You've served with honor. You've carried burdens most people never see. And you did all of it without ever asking for recognition. She looked at him, something raw and honest in her eyes. Daniel, you are the type of man this base should be built around, and I refuse to let politics erase that. Daniel's breath shook as he exhaled. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet. Her voice gentled. Just know this. I'm not doing this out of pity or guilt or pressure. I'm doing it because it's right. He stared at the promotion form, the printed lettering, the signature line awaiting his name. His throat tightened. I'm not sure I deserve this, he whispered. Brianna leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. You do. More than anyone I've known. The room felt smaller suddenly, warmer, charged. Bella's footsteps pattered across the floor. She approached Daniel and touched his arm. Daddy, are you okay? He smiled, pulling her into his lap. I'm okay, Belle. She noticed Brianna watching her and held out her rabbit shyly. Do you want to hold him? Brianna blinked, caught off guard. Yes. I'd like that. Bella placed the rabbit gently in Brianna's hands. The Admiral, stoic, disciplined, untouchable, held it with surprising tenderness. Bella grinned, then wrapped her small arms around Brianna in a spontaneous hug. Daniel's breath hitched. Brianna froze, then slowly, very slowly returned the embrace. A softness washed over her features that Daniel had never seen before. When Bella skipped away again, Brianna looked at Daniel. I meant what I said, she murmured, about making things right, about standing with the truth. This is where it begins. Daniel's voice was low, full of gratitude and something deeper. Thank you. Brianna? She rose, smoothing her uniform. You'll have until tomorrow to sign the paperwork. But whatever you choose, I support you. He stood as well. When she reached the door, rain still gently tapping outside, she paused. Daniel, she said softly without turning back. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something better. Then she stepped out into the rain. Daniel watched her go, a realization settling into him like the slow, warm glow of sunrise. A storm had brought her to his door. But something far brighter had left with her. The Command Council chamber had always been an austere room, high ceilings, polished oak walls lined with portraits of stern-faced admirals whose legacies loomed over every decision made inside. It was a place where careers were forged or broken, where silence carried more weight than words, and where truth often bowed beneath the enormous pressure of politics. But on this particular morning, something felt different. As Admiral Brianna Lane stepped inside, every head turned toward her with a mixture of expectation and tension. She looked immaculate in her uniform, white-pressed, authoritative, yet there was something altered in her presence. A steadiness not of protocol, but of conviction. The room fell silent as she approached the long table where the council members sat. Admiral Lane, Vice Admiral Ross, said, steepling his fingers. We trust you have reviewed the reassignment order. I have, Brianna responded, voice strong but controlled. And Ross raised an eyebrow expecting compliance. Brianna placed her hands lightly on the table. I will not reassign Technician Daniel Cole. A murmur rippled across the room. Ross leaned back, unimpressed. We're not requesting your opinion, Admiral. We're instructing you to follow protocol. With respect, Sir Brianna replied, protocol must coexist with truth, and the truth is that Daniel Cole did nothing wrong. Another council member, Admiral Fuller, frowned. The photograph creates an appearance of impropriety. That alone is grounds for reassignment. The The photograph, Brianna said evenly, shows a sick child being helped into a hospital. A child whose father had a broken-down vehicle and whose life mattered far more than how it might be perceived. It shows you carrying a civilian's child, Fuller countered. Not a sailor's, a civilian's. The press will spin that in ways that compromise this institution. I didn't serve this institution to avoid compassion, Brianna replied. I served it to uphold honor. Ross's eyes hardened. Lane tread carefully. Brianna inhaled deeply a breath that felt like a lifetime of decisions converging at once. For 20 years, she began, I have done everything the Navy asked of me. I've upheld discipline, enforced regulations, and protected the integrity of this base. But I refused to punish a man of character because someone took a photograph without context. The room sharpened. She continued, her voice lowering but gaining force. Daniel Cole is a veteran who served with distinction for 12 years. He's saved lives more than once. He carries himself with humility, dignity, and quiet strength. His work here has been exemplary. His devotion to his daughter is unwavering. Fuller interjected, this is not a hearing about his parenting. No, Brianna said, it's about truth and justice, and whether we as leaders still recognize those values. Ross slapped his palm lightly on the table. This is not a courtroom, Lane. It is a chain of command. Then consider this my formal stance within that chain, she replied. I will not sacrifice a good man to preserve a lie. Gasps echoed around the chamber. Ross narrowed his eyes. Do you understand what you're risking? Your career, your trajectory, everything you've built. Brianna's gaze didn't waver. A career built on suppressing integrity isn't worth keeping, sir. The room went still. Not hostile, not supportive, shocked. No one had seen Brianna Lane, Ice Queen of Discipline, the unbreakable Admiral, speak with such raw conviction. Ross stood slowly. If you defy this council's directive, you leave us no choice but to review your status. Then review it, she said. A whisper spread through the council. Some looked impressed, despite themselves. Others looked furious. But none could ignore the unwavering resolve standing before them. Fuller leaned forward. Are you sure you want this to be the hill you die on? This hill, Brianna said calmly, is truth. Ross stared at her for several long seconds. Finally, he sighed, the sound of a man who realized he had underestimated something powerful. Lane, he said, voice quieter now, you're forcing our hand. If doing the right thing forces your hand, she replied gently, then perhaps the hand was too tight to begin with. More murmurs, chairs creaked, older admirals exchanged glances. Ross finally sank back into his seat. Very well, he said. If you will not comply, the matter moves to a review board. Until then, your decision stands. Her decision stands. It was not a victory, but it was not a loss either. It was a beginning. Outside the council chamber, officers and aides stood scattered in the hallway. They had heard rumors of the confrontation. None expected the outcome. As Brianna stepped into the corridor, they rose instinctively, some out of respect, others out of curiosity. Lieutenant Harper was among them. Her eyes were wide. Admiral, did you really tell the council? Yes, Brianna said simply. Harper swallowed. And now, Brianna replied, we go back to work. There was a pause, then Harper's voice softened. Ma'am? For what it's worth? Many of us think you did the right thing. Brianna blinked, surprised, moved. Thank you. As she walked down the hallway, something strange happened. Officers, she passed men and women who had always admired her discipline, but never her humanity, stepped aside and began to applaud. Quiet at first, tentative, then stronger, not out of defiance, but out of recognition. Recognition that true leadership had just revealed itself in the most unexpected way. Brianna felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she didn't let it fall. She simply nodded at them once firmly and continued walking. Daniel waited near the maintenance hangar, uncertainty knotting his stomach. He had no idea what the council had decided, no idea whether Brianna had been forced to compromise. When he saw her approaching alone, unbroken, his breath caught. How did it go? He asked quietly. Brianna met his eyes. I stood, with the truth she said, and others stood with me. Daniel exhaled, relief washing through him. "You did it?" "No," she said gently. "We did it." Their eyes held two worlds, two wounds, two strengths finally aligned. And for the first time Daniel saw not Admiral Lane, the unshakable commander, but Brianna, the woman who chose integrity over ambition, a woman worth standing beside. The storm was not over, but for the first time they were standing in it together. The spring sun rose gently over Norfolk Naval Station, casting warm light across the shoreline and the steel silhouettes of anchored ships. Seagulls wheeled through the brightening sky, their calls echoing faintly across the pier. It was the kind of morning that carried promise, the quiet assurance that storms, no matter how fierce, eventually passed. A small gathering stood near the operations deck, where a modest ceremony had been arranged. There were no banners, no marching bands, no grand speeches, just a cluster of officers, technicians and sailors who had come not out of obligation, but out of respect. Daniel Cole stood near the front wearing a freshly pressed civilian uniform. Bella clung to his hand, her hair tied in a neat ribbon, her eyes shining with excitement. She bounced lightly on her toes as if the whole world felt lighter today. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Is the Admiral coming?" Daniel smiled. "She'll be here soon." Bella nodded satisfied and hugged her stuffed rabbit closer. The ceremony was simple to formally acknowledge Daniel's promotion and recognize his exemplary service, not just in the past weeks, but throughout his quiet, unassuming tenure on base. Lieutenant Harper approached with a clipboard, offering Daniel an encouraging smile. "You ready? As ready as I'll ever be." Harper leaned down to Bella. "And are you ready for your big moment?" Bella gasped. "Do I get a moment?" "Oh, absolutely," Harper said with a playful wink. "You're the star today." Bella gave a thrilled little spin. Before Daniel could thank Harper, a hush fell over the group. People straightened, attention shifting toward the walkway. Admiral Brianna Lane was approaching. Her uniform gleamed in the sunlight, the silver accents catching the morning light. But it wasn't her medals or her posture that drew the eye. It was the unmistakable warmth softening her expression as she spotted Daniel and Bella waiting. Daniel's breath caught for a moment. She looked different. Not changed exactly, but more open, as if the battle she had fought and won had carved space inside her for something gentler. Brianna reached them and greeted Bella first. "Good morning, Bella." She knelt down, a gesture that still astonished everyone around her. "Are you feeling better?" Bella nodded. "Very better," Daddy said. "Today is special." "It is," Brianna said, smiling. "Very special indeed." She stood and turned to Daniel. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, though his chest tightened with something far deeper than nerves. More than ready. The ceremony began with a brief acknowledgement from the base commander, a formality, but one delivered with sincerity. "Today we recognize Technician Daniel Cole for his outstanding service and integrity. His dedication, skill and character have exemplified the highest standards of this base." A small wave of applause moved through the crowd. Daniel felt Bella squeeze his hand tighter. The commander continued, "And in acknowledgement of his contributions, we are pleased to appoint him Supervisor of Technical Operations." More applause, louder this time. Several technicians whistled, a few sailors clapped him on the back. But Daniel's eyes were fixed on Brianna. She stepped forward carrying a small box. When she opened it, he expected a pin or badge. Instead, she held out a simple silver nameplate, Daniel Cole, Supervisor Technical Operations. Not flashy, not grand, but deeply meaningful. "Congratulations, Daniel," she said, voice warm. "You earned this." He accepted it, emotion thickening his breath. "Thank you, Admiral." Their eyes met for a beat, too long, long enough to communicate everything words could not. Gratitude, respect, a recognition of the journey they had traveled together. Bella wriggled between them suddenly. "Daddy, Admiral, lady, can I give my part now?" The crowd chuckled. Brianna smiled. "Yes, Bella, it's your turn." Bella reached into her little backpack and pulled out a single yellow flower, bright, cheerful, freshly picked from the small patch of wildflowers near their apartment. She held it out to Brianna. "This is for you," Bella said, "because Daddy says you're brave, and because you helped us, and because you're nice, even if you look serious sometimes." Laughter rippled through the group. Brianna froze, not out of coldness, but out of being genuinely moved. She gently accepted the flower as if it was something fragile, precious. Her voice softened. "Thank you, Bella. This means more than you know." Bella threw her arms around Brianna's waist in a spontaneous hug. The Admiral stiffened reflexively, then melted into the embrace, her hand settling tenderly on the little girl's back. Daniel watched, breath caught in his chest. Something in the moment felt like a quiet shift in the universe, small but profound. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed, leaving only a few lingering conversations. Bella scampered off to show her rabbit the nearby boats, leaving Brianna and Daniel standing near the edge of the pier. The water shimmered with morning light. A gentle breeze tugged at their clothes. "It suits you," Brianna said, nodding toward the nameplate in his hand. "Feels heavier than I expected," Daniel replied with a faint smile. "Good things usually do." He looked at her, taking in the lines of fatigue still faintly visible around her eyes, the aftermath of the council, the weight she had carried. "How are you holding up?" she exhaled. "Better than I thought. The review board is still looming, but I'm not afraid of it anymore." "You stood up for what was right," he said. "That matters." She turned to him, her gaze steady and unguarded. "I didn't just stand up for you, Daniel. I stood up for myself. For the part of me I'd forgotten existed." He felt the truth of that settle deeply between them. The wind carried the soft scent of salt. Bella's laughter floated in the distance. Brianna spoke again, her voice quieter now. "You reminded me what integrity looks like when it's lived, not just spoken. And you reminded me," Daniel said, "that leadership can be something beautiful, not just rigid." Their eyes held once more, not as commander and technician, not as superior and subordinate, but as two human beings who had discovered something rare in one another, trust built not on rank, but on truth. Bella ran back, breathless with excitement. "Daddy Admiral, look, the boats are dancing." Daniel chuckled. "That's the tide bell." Brianna extended her hand to the child. "Shall we go see it together?" Bella grasped her hand without hesitation. Daniel fell into step beside them, and the three of them, an admiral with a newly awakened heart, a veteran quietly rediscovering hope, and a little girl who had unknowingly changed both their lives, walked along the pier beneath the brightening morning sky. Nothing was spoken about the future, but something unspoken settled between them unmistakably. This was not the end, this was a beginning born from truth, courage, kindness, and the quiet, extraordinary healing of three lives that finally found one another. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Share your city or state in the comments. Our community spans so many places, and it's always a joy to see where our stories travel. And if you'd like more uplifting stories about kindness, quiet courage, and second chances, please consider subscribing to our channel. It truly supports us and helps these gentle stories reach more people who need them. Thank you sincerely for spending your time with this story today. We appreciate you more than words can say.